Conference previews of the SEC, the South Central Hockey League, and the OAA on this week's episode of the podcast. So if you want to talk some hockey, you've come to the right place. Hit that subscribe button here on YouTube, follow on Apple and Spotify, and check out pdspicks.com for everything we discuss on the pod today. Last week's episode, obviously, we got into conference previews, first round of that last week. And if you're following me on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you've obviously seen a lot of these previews start to come out as well. So be sure you're following so you don't miss any of the updates there. This week in particular, I'm trying to do these in batches of 3 if you haven't caught on by now. Getting a lot of requests on social media. Do this conference, do the SBL, do this, do that. It's coming. It's in the works. Be patient, and we will obviously get to all of the 13 conferences, leagues, and associations in Michigan high school hockey leading up to puck drop here next month. So, okay, so this week on tap, the SEC, South Central, and OAA, like I mentioned. I'm going to start with the SEC. There's a little bit of familiarity for me here in the SEC, a conference I'm quite familiar with. It wasn't that long ago. I was actually on a bench in the SEC coaching for Saline and against the Ann Arbor schools and Jackson United and going down to Ohio to play a conference game against Bedford and all that type of stuff. So it's a pretty unique landscape with some intense rivalries. Not going to lie, there's definitely some heat there, which made a lot of those games on a nightly basis pretty fun. So there's always some interesting storylines to follow. I feel like year to year too. You get into the Ann Arbor schools and the Dan Gillick Cup, obviously, and a lot of those kids know each other, have history with each other, played on Pee Wee teams together, and now they're playing against each other at the high school level. So a lot of interesting dynamics there in the SEC. Excuse me. Sorry. All right. So I wrote on the blog this week regarding the SEC that it's got a little bit of a old school Big Ten feel to it, where it was the Big Two and the Little Eight with Michigan and Ohio State, and the SEC, not to be confused with the football conference. Obviously, the SEC here in Michigan has a bit of a Big Two, Little Seven feel to it in recent years. Particularly Saline in the red division, Chelsea in the white division. Those have been your division champs for 4 straight years now, with nothing changed at the top there. Chelsea's run, I think, goes even a couple years further back, and obviously they've been, the class of the conference, so to speak, for a lot of years, and not just at the conference level, but also the state level in performance in the postseason as well. But as we kind of look at what's on the horizon for these teams, or not necessarily what they've done, but what they have coming back and potential and projecting towards the future. Saline graduated a ton of important pieces last spring. I want to say the graduating class was only 6 or 8 guys, but in that group you had your top 2 leading scorers and a 3-year starter in net. Mateo Idapalo, Blake Woodrell, and then Tyler Schroeder have kind of been cornerstone pieces for the Hornets for a long time now. I believe Idapalo being a 4-year guy, Woodrell was a 3-year guy, Schroeder a 3-year guy, like I mentioned. Those are some big holes to fill this winter. And similarly, you look at Chelsea. Sure, they bring back a 4-year starter in Luke Webster in goal. And he's kind of essentially dominated this conference that entire time. His numbers, I mentioned this in the blog on pdspicks.com, his numbers against conference opponents are incredible. A .94 goals against average last season against the SEC. Gives up less than a goal a game in his outings. He's won 17 straight games in SEC play. Or no, excuse me. He's gone 17 straight games in SEC play without allowing more than 2 goals against. So you're not going to get a lot of pucks by this guy. If you're going to beat Chelsea with Webster in net, you're going to have to hope and pray you can win a low scoring game, a 1-0, a 2-1 type deal. Because teams in the SEC just have not been able to solve Webster in net for Chelsea there. His high school hockey resume, as I kind of rattled off quite a few of those stats there, is quite lengthy. And especially when you consider what he's done in fall seasons as well, and spent this season, last season as well, I believe, with the MDHL. There aren't many in high school hockey right now as decorated as him, or who have assembled the high school hockey resume that Webster has in goal. However, even despite having that kind of ace up your sleeve, so to speak, in net, I think there are still some vulnerabilities to this Chelsea team. If you've got a goalie, though, you've always got a chance, especially in high school hockey. So I think Chelsea is still the prohibitive favorite in the conference. But they've always had a strong source of offense to go with that. You go back to last season with Keegan Montgomery and Brandon Davila. Before that, it was Jack Roberts and Devin McIntyre, who were two studs that nobody in the conference could really keep pace with. And even if you want to go all the way back to like Braden Steele and Brennan Wright, that was back in 2017-18 timeframe. The Bulldogs have always seemed to have kind of that tandem, a duo, a 1-2 punch, or even more up front to kind of produce offense in great quantities. And maybe they have that this season as well, but I'm just not as sure it's as defined to start this season. Those guys haven't necessarily been identified yet, and maybe they are. Maybe they're waiting on a guy or guys to kind of step up in Chelsea, so to speak, and kind of take ownership of the offense. I wouldn't call it a major concern by any stretch of the imagination, but their top 5 scorers from last season have all graduated, so someone has to step up, right? But the good news, like I said, with Webster in net, he provides kind of that stability at a very crucial position in the game, while the rest of the lineup, I think, can kind of settle into their roles, figure out the system, kind of improve on and get a good grasp on the X's and O's, and ultimately kind of find their niche in order to start developing that offense, obviously, that they lost last season. So, okay. So I'm going to shift over to I'll stay in the white division. I'm going to touch on a couple other teams in the white division specifically. Lenawee United has been kind of building pretty steadily for a few years now. And I see that trend continuing into this winter as well. And hats off to that group. 15 wins for the second time in 3 years. I think that's a really big accomplishment. And remember, that was a program that won just one game during the COVID shortened season of 2021. So not too far removed from some real struggles and some real challenges on that front. Now kind of turning the page, climbing the ladder, taking that next step, as I said, kind of building a program and everything. So I really like the direction that they're heading. Love the way they played as a team when I saw them last season. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I put it in the blog on pdspicks.com. One of the 6 players in the conference that I kind of featured. Rhett McAuliffe is legit, man. He's the real deal. 28 goals and 50 points last season as a junior. And I'm telling you, like, this kid can hang with anyone in the state. He really is the real deal. So with that in mind, keeping in mind the direction of the program is heading, keeping in mind that they have a real stud in McAuliffe there, that could be a team that could put a scare into Chelsea and could really challenge other teams in the SEC for that. I'll call it a de facto top spot. There is no definitive conference champion. It's just the red division and the white division champions. Maybe it would be nice to see the 2 division champs go head to head and hash it out for an overarching conference championship, but that will not be the case this season. So you're kind of left to speculate on who that number 1 team may be. Okay. Also, reports out of Dexter are really high. I've heard a lot about their off season this past summer. Undefeated in summer hockey, if you choose to kind of read into those results. Summer hockey isn't really about wins and losses for me personally. You got kids on vacation, holes in your roster. You're pulling up a freshman to kind of fill out your roster to compete in some of these games. You've got dual sport guys playing football and soccer that are missing from the lineup too. In a lot of instances. Maybe your number one goalie is healing up from injuries in the off season, whatever the kind of variables may be, right? So I just don't put much weight into wins and losses in July necessarily, but I still think it's worth noting as Dexter kind of looks to build momentum here in the SEC, and a strong summer can certainly instill some of that confidence and get guys to compete against the big brands, your Chelseas and Skylines and Pioneers and things like that in the SEC. Um, I'm also told too they've got some nice pieces coming in too. Maybe one or two AAA type guys coming into the mix, and that's always something with these previews. I do try to focus more on um, returners, guys that I feel pretty confident in coming into the picture, and I try to stay away as best I can as far as the new guys potentially coming in because nothing is for certain, obviously, until those final cuts are made and roster decisions are determined. So I try to stay away from speculating on what players may or may not be coming in for all programs. I kind of just do that across the board. Uh, but like I said, rumor has it there could be a potential, a couple guys coming in there for Dexter. So you factor all that in, and the Dreads could be significantly improved from 6 win campaign a season ago. So definitely worth noting there. Okay, I'm going to move over to the Red Division, which I feel like could be a bit of the Wild West this winter. I mentioned a lot of the losses that Saline experienced over the summer. A lot of those outside of your control, right? Graduation. Everyone loses kids to graduation. Skyline graduated a bunch. Carson Kacharski finally graduated from Ann Arbor Huron. It felt like he had been there for a decade. Was just a kid that had a very long and hopefully enjoyable high school career. But for me as a coach and now kind of doing what I'm doing now, it felt like he had just been with Huron for forever. So he has now since moved on to, I believe he's playing 18U for the Sioux Indians, kind of taking advantage of that. We'll call it a gap year post grad with some youth hockey eligibility still left. So that's nice to see. There's going to be a lot of new faces in the SEC Red, right? With a lot of those programs graduating, either having large graduating classes or important graduating classes on their way out. I think that could make for a bunch of chaos when you have, I wrote on the blog on pdspicks.com. You can check it out. I actually I'm on top of my game today. Actually, the links are already in the description at the time of recording this. So if you're on YouTube right now or listening on Apple or Spotify, you can get the links to these conference previews right there in the description. So it feels like so let me back up there. So what I wrote in the blog is that it feels like every team in the SEC Red is at varying degrees of, we'll say, rebuild, right? And especially when considering teams like Skyline and Saline, who are the top two teams in this division, graduated all their top guys. And so when you're either replacing your top scorers or you're replacing huge holes in your lineup, that's a pretty big undertaking, and kind of why I lean towards the rebuild label. Not an ideal label, I get that, but just trying to put it in a bucket or be able to describe where some of these teams are. Because of that, because of where I see Skyline and Saline coming into this season, I feel like Pioneer just might be a little bit further along in that quote unquote rebuilding process than some of the other teams in the division. Last season felt like a bit of a work in progress for Pioneer. It seemed like a young team, at least that was my perspective on it. Birth years, ages, graduating classes information, none of that was available on the hub, so it was a little bit hard to to decipher that for Pioneer. But so I'm taking, a bit of a guess or in the dark, so to speak. But that was always my understanding last season was that it was a bit of a younger team, a bit of a developing team, kind of scratching and clawing its way through the season, and not in a bad way, but just kind of like I said, building and trying to progress with every game, with every practice, with every week. So with that in mind, still seems like a bit of a young team, even coming into this season. You saw some of those peaks and valleys last season with, wins over Saline and Skyline, but then suffering losses to Huron and Bedford. Saline and Skyline obviously finished ahead of Pioneer in the rankings, but those are two feathers in the cap. They beat those teams. The inverse, obviously, Scott Pioneer ahead of Huron and Bedford in the rankings, but suffered losses to those teams. So just kind of the peaks and valleys that I mentioned, and maybe some, if you want to call it inconsistency in the results. So consistency should likely be the goal this winter as I kind of get into it now, and leaning on some of those returners. Anthony Yang being one that I mentioned in the blog, leaning on those types of guys for consistency. And I think that could lead to them potentially winning their first SEC division championship here in at least a couple of years now. Like I said, it's been Saline 4 years in a row. And then the records got a little wonky after that on the hub. Pioneer was showing zeros, 0, 0, and 0 back in 2020 and 2019 or something like that. So it was a little hard to determine who your division champion was there. So nonetheless, it's been a couple of years since the Pioneers have been on top of the division, and I think that could very well change as soon as this winter. So, okay, so we'll put a bow on that for the SEC, and we will move west to the South Central Hockey League, and we'll get into that here in a second. So, the South Central is an interesting league. So I'll get into it here. I mentioned, if you're following me on Twitter, I was pretty blunt with my description of the South Central. I hate this league. I hate it because it's just so hard to predict on a night-to-night, week-to-week, season-to-season basis. Who's the best team in the league? I don't know. Who's the worst team in the league? All right, maybe we can figure out who the worst team is and work from there. I don't know who the worst team in the league is this year. It is wide open, and maybe more wide open this year than it's ever been in recent memory. And so that's what I mean is a very playful hatred towards the league. Is just that it's so evenly balanced, well coached. I'm going to get into a lot more of the details here as well, but did want to clarify that it's just so, from my perspective or where I'm sitting, it can be very frustrating, kind of making some of these proclamations and some of these predictions as far as how we think things will unfold. So I'll get into more details here. So one thing that I do think is worth noting, two things I think that are worth noting in this conference. One, it is the largest league in terms of surface area, when you consider the fact that member programs span all the way from Owasso, which is one of the 6 schools that makes up the East Side Stars Co-op, and Owasso being northeast of Lansing, all the way down to Mattawan, which is southwest of the I-94 and 131 interchange. That's 124 miles from edge to edge in this league. It really puts things into perspective there. And as much ground as that covers, the 7-team league was actually downgraded to 6 members this offseason, with the departure of the 2024 league champion, Jackson Lumen Christie. So a bit of a, I don't want to call it a bummer or anything like that, but it's I think the second instance of, there's going to be one more, and I know that at least one more, where your defending league champion has departed for the 24-25 season. I believe Houghton is on its way out of, is it the Big North? I don't know offhand, but out of the UP conference there. So 2 conference champions on their way out moving forward. and then Lumen obviously being the other one. So unique circumstance, I think, where there's a vacancy at the top. And it's funny. So I was getting chirped on social media pretty good for all of my projected standings and for all of the conferences, but the SCHL in particular. Hey, I'm here for it. Let's talk about it. This is exactly why I'm doing what I do, is just to kind of spark some of this buzz and interest and conversations. So, hey, if you don't like my picks, this gasses you up to go out and prove me wrong. Great, I'm pulling for you. Keep those receipts. That's fine. I'm hanging on to mine too. But I had a good laugh though. One guy on Facebook, made a comment about being way off on my predictions last year. So why even bother doing it again this year? And South Central, like I said, is a volatile one and tough to predict. But because of his comment, I got to thinking. I was like, well, what did I write last year for this particular preview? And so I went back into the archives and I'll just let me read this verbatim. And you can too, right? PDspicks.com. Feel free to check out the 23-24 preview. But here we go. I think the SCHL will be utter chaos this season. The league champion may finish with multiple conference losses on their resume come season's end, and as many as 3 different teams could still be in the hunt by February. End quote. So, I went on to pick Cap City as the league champ, and Lumen obviously went on to win, which I'm sure is, what prompted the Facebook user pointing it out in the first place, or my error in picks as far as who the conference champ was going to be. But Lumen, your league champ, was 9-2-1, multiple losses. Check. Portage, Matawan. You could even lump in East Side and Cap City in there as still in the hunt come February. Check, check. So come at me because I got the conference championship wrong. Fine, whatever. I painted a pretty good picture for how the season was going to unfold, and even mentioned it could be a close race. So yeah, you don't like my pick? Great. What's yours then? Lay it on me. Let's have some of these conversations here leading up to the season. And have some fun, and look, just enjoy the ride a little bit. This is we're having fun here. So, okay. I mentioned last season's preview because I feel like a lot of the same could be said for this season as well, especially with the departures of Lumen Christie. It's even more wide open at the top. This league is chaos. I mentioned it earlier. And mentioned it on Twitter this week, and just my, like I said, hatred for the league. The other thing too that I think makes this really difficult is it's the lowest scoring league in Michigan high school hockey by far. I put out a graphic earlier this fall and ranked all the conferences by average scoring per game. Excuse me. And the SCHL had the lowest 5.47 total goals scored per game. That's almost a full goal and a half lower than the statewide average for a high school hockey game. So offense is so hard to come by. There's great coaches, strong goaltending, and defenses with structure, which I can't stress how rare that is at this level, and how great a job the coaches in this conference do to diagram up these defenses, execute it in practice, and then have it translate to games as well. These coaches really do a great job of teaching these kids up and getting them to play within a system and staying committed to it in ways you might see flashes of it with like a Stevenson or a Houghton or Byron Center, but you don't really see it across the board in a conference or a league like you do here in the SCHL. So it really is impressive. And don't look at that, lowest scoring league in the state as a black eye, like, oh, they don't have any skill to score offense. No, it's that they are that disciplined that they shut opponents down. And those league games really turn into a bit of a chess match, and who's going to blink first and who's going to give up the first power play opportunity and take advantage of a 5-on-4 or something like that. So it really is a testament to, and I expand on that obviously in the blog on some of these coaches who I really truly believe are high level coaches at any level of the game. So like I said, be sure to check that out for more information on the SCHL. I'm going to get into a couple of the teams. We'll talk some players. There's one team in particular I really wanted to spend some time talking about. Kalamazoo United. They've been kind of at the bottom of this league now for the last several years. But I think that could really change in 24-25 here. This was a young team last season. They could return as many as 20 players this winter, with 15 of them still being underclassmen. Think about that for a second. I think this Kalamazoo squad is about to turn a corner in a big way. And I need you to hear me out here. So they beat their rival Kalamazoo Eagles last November in an overtime thriller. I believe it was 2-1, which was KU's first league game win in over 2 years. So 2 years might have even been longer. I'd have to go back and double check, but they went on to, there's one feather in your cap. They went on to outscore the highest scoring team in the state in a 7-5 win over Farmington United later that year too. They played Cap City close, not once but twice. The East Side, and both games against Portage were tight too. So they're playing up to that competition and really starting to close that gap with some of those top tier teams in their league. There's signs of things starting to build, and I am all here for it. And I'll tell you why. Like my freshman year, I'm gonna take a trip down PD's memory lane here a little bit for you. My freshman year, I played on a team that won 6 games, and we were the bottom feeder of the conference, right? That second year, we came back, added some young talent to the mix, and in our first conference game of my sophomore year, we beat then Lansing Catholic Central, who was a pretty, perennial powerhouse in mid-Michigan at the time. We beat them like 3-2 or 4-3, some type of nail biter, right? You would have thought we won the state title in the locker room after that game. Guys were so fired up. And that win was so iconic and motivating for us because it really just became a building block for a team that went on to win 18 games my sophomore year, I think. And then by my senior year, we were conference champions of that same league that we were once bottom feeders of. And I always think back to like that game. There's little victories along the way that ultimately leads up to some of your bigger wins. So my point here in kind of drawing that comparison to KU is the win over a rival, those close games, young talent that's buying in and believing that they can compete. Like KU ain't no bottom feeder no more. I think they start climbing the rankings this winter in a big way. And I think they really start to show that they can compete with the other teams in their league and watch them pull off an upset or two in league play that people don't see coming. So that may not win the league this season, but they are absolutely heading in the right direction. And my preseason standings for the SCHL, I have them. You can check it out on my Instagram account. Actually, I have KU at 5, but my gosh, it was a tough decision because I could see them squeaking up to 4 and really competing and even earning at least 1, maybe 2 wins against teams that I have ranked ahead of them. So could be the muddled mess in the SCHL is only going to get trickier with the potential rise of Kalamazoo United. So a couple players I wanted to note real quick. I really liked Toby Perot this fall. He was good for Cap City last season as a sophomore. I think he's really developed his game. He's gone from a really good, solid D man in the SCHL to potentially earning statewide recognition, I think, amongst defensemen in the class of 2026. I'd absolutely have him in consideration for the top 6D in the state among juniors. I'd have him on my radar for Team Michigan in the spring and even beyond that, obviously. So Chase Potter will stay with Cap City here for a minute. Same thing. The Caps could be in a position this season where they have the best goalie, the best D, and the best forward here in Potter, all on the same team. Plus, you got guys like Will Tucker. I got to mention him too. Like, there's a lot of pieces to this Cap City team that could make them really strong, not just on the league level, but on the state level as well. How about Caden Stashenko? I got it right this time. I didn't get it right last season. He was a guy I spotlighted in my conference previews a year ago, but now a 4-year guy for the Muskies. He's got 94 career points, which, if it's not the most, it's definitely among the most points among active high school hockey players right now. Need to do a little bit more research on that front and assemble maybe your top 10 active scorers in Michigan high school hockey, but Stashenko definitely in the mix on that front. He looked good, to no surprise, in MDHL action this fall. He's scrappy. He works hard. Great effort. Feet are always moving. There's just a lot to like about his game. And on top of that, Portage could bring back both goalies from last season, both of whom had sub 2.0 goals against averages. Andrew Curry and Lee Laporte there. So Portage really embodies that that difficult, scrappy, hard to score against mantra or um, kind of profile that I've painted of SCHL teams. Portage obviously fits that to a T. So with Stashenko offensively and 2 sound goalies in net, they're my pick for league champion this season, but I fully expect this to be a close race yet again and come down to the wire, even into the final week of SCHL action. So I posted the league standings projections on my Instagram. I've mentioned that a couple times now. Be sure to check that out. I'll mention here too, Carson Maturin on the blue line for Matawan. One piece of his skill set that I think is really undervalued just in terms of young defenseman prospects is his ability to get pucks through traffic and on goal. I can't tell you how valuable that is. Seems like he's always finding shooting lanes from up top, something that not all good defensemen have the ability to do, and I think definitely sets him apart. One other thing worth noting here too, East Side, the East Side Stars graduated 16 seniors last spring. That's an insane number. And in that group was your goaltender, Reed Drouer. So he was huge for them in that last season. It sounds like even with that sizable loss, not just in terms of numbers, but impact on your roster, the Stars could actually be in a position to reload with some incoming talent too. So even despite having a lot of seniors walk out the door, there's potential for help on the way. I just kind of got to see it to believe it before I start making any bold proclamations or anything like that. So, okay, let me rattle this off real quick and we'll go from here. My standings in order. And again, this is on my Instagram if you want to check it out. Number 1, Portage, 2, Cap City, 3, Matawan, 4, East Side, 5, KU, 6, Kalamazoo Eagles. And I think 1, 2, 3 could be interchangeable. And I think 4, 5, 6 could be interchangeable. And 2, 3, 4 could be interchangeable. 3, 4, 5 could be interchangeable. Like, it's just a muddled mess here in the SCHL in a great way. You love to see things like that where conferences and leagues are competitive top to bottom, left to right. And I think you absolutely get that in the SCHL. So, okay, let's wrap things up with the OAA. Last fall, I talked at length about how I felt Clarkston was here to stay. They weren't a flash in the pan. This program was built for sustained success. And I really believe they're going to do just that here in 24-25. Look, they lost Owen Croston to graduation last spring. He was my number 1 player on my players to watch list heading into last season. They also lost Ron Wade, who embarked on his junior hockey career. He's in the NCDC this winter, 4 points in 7 games, by the way. Shout out to the Idaho Falls Spud Kings, great name. Uh, but Coach Breyer lost two key cornerstone pieces, three really. Um, as I'm sitting here, they lost Evan Adams to graduation as well. Can't forget about him. He's playing. He's in the North American League right now. Like, God, talk about talent and big time talent leaving the program. Adams, shout out to the Shreveport Mudbugs, another great name. You lose three guys essentially to high level junior hockey. That's like, I'd call that generational players at this level of our game in high school hockey. Most programs are lucky to get one of those in a 5, 6, 10 year stretch. Clarkston had three of them at the same time with Croston, Wade, and Adams. That would be crippling to most schools, most high school programs. But Clarkston, on the other hand, just reloads and keeps running with guys like Kyle Lynch and the Damian brothers. And they may not even skip a beat from last season to this season. 14 returners from last season's team. That was a Final Four team nonetheless, and an overtime goal away from a state final appearance. I love the way Kyle Lynch plays. I thought he was huge for them last season, even in the shadows of some of those other guys who kind of drew the headlines, right? Croston and Wade and Adams, I think, were some of the first names out of most people's mouths that watched this team. But Lynch, I think, was second on the team in points. Big producer for him last season, regardless. I think he has a real opportunity this winter to step into the spotlight and really own it. Same thing for Trey Damian on the back end. He was one of, if not the best defenseman so far this fall for MHA Red. And his brother Brady in net, still just a 2008 born junior with 21 games of experience, including playing on the biggest stages in high school hockey. In my opinion, that being the MIHL Showcase in Trenton, and then obviously your state finals in Plymouth. So he's seen some of the best that this level has to offer in terms of competition. In Brady Damian there, maintaining a 1.93 goals against average in the face of that competition. So Gavin Anderson, Frank Stanek, George Walker, it doesn't end with this team. They just keep adding more pieces to the puzzle. There's a lot to talk about with Clarkston specifically. I spent a lot of time on them with the blog as well. But there's a lot more I want to get to here with the OAA as well. So it's a unique league in the sense that there really are teams in the OAA at virtually every, call it, tier level of high school hockey. You have a top 10 title favorite in Clarkston. You've got a couple top 25 contenders with like M1 United and Stony Creek and even Lake Orion most years, right? Birmingham Unified, Bloomfield Hills, RU in recent memory, kind of in that 30 to 60 range in the state too. And then you got programs that are growing and hopeful and building, like Farmington United and Bloomfield Hills and North Oakland and Troy. I don't know that you could take a 25 to 30 team snapshot of my hockey rankings without having at least one OAA team in the picture. And so I think that makes for a very unique kind of conference landscape when you have such diverse teams and programs. Can make for some lopsided results on the ice, I'm sure, but I also think it showcases the various skill and competition levels that exist within high school hockey. So the OAA is split into two divisions. You got an upper and a lower division with the white and the red. There isn't an off-season like relegation process, so to speak, like you see in soccer, or the OKC on the west side used to have it in place, I think, as recently as last year, where the bottom team in the top division would move down and the top team in the bottom division would move up. The OAA doesn't necessarily function that way, but kind of happenstance, coincidence. Rochester United, who did finish last in the red division last season, is in fact moving down to the white division this season. But like I said, it's more of a kind of coincidence than anything. but definitely meant for competitive purposes and whatnot. And I do think it also balances out the two divisions at 5-5, if I'm not mistaken. But are you went 0-9-1 last season, but even with their struggles last season, I think made some big progress this offseason, all things considered. Sounds like they've got some really good prospects coming in, able to land a couple kids that could have an immediate impact on this roster, which is great to hear. I got a good look at one of them at MDHL tryouts, Braden Buckler. He's an '09 that I liked a lot at tryouts. Was actually kind of surprised to see him absent from the league this fall, but he was a good skater. I thought he had smooth puck skills, had a good frame too, especially he looked pretty big for being an '09, playing up with guys that are 2 and 3 years older than him. So Buckler was one that really stood out to me, and I think is one of those guys who could have a really big impact right out of the gate. A couple other players here I'll get into. Brady Brink obviously was one of the six I had mentioned players to watch in the conference. Him out of Farmington United. I mentioned active leading scorers in high school hockey earlier. Brink is a guy who has 82 career points already. He's another candidate for the 100-point club this winter. And he's just a junior still. Got a lot of time ahead of him, too. Uh, there's a new coach behind the bench for Farmington United, and that's a program that it's kind of been in the midst of a turnaround, a rebuild, so to speak. They won 13 games last season, 2 years after losing 23 games. So there was steady progress and development happening there. And coaching changes can sometimes maybe thwart that growth or get you off of that development path. But I don't see that being the case here with Joe DeGrotto stepping in. He was an assistant under the old regime there. So there's familiarity and understanding of kind of the expectations there, and I think he actually helps continue and further that progression we've seen out of Farm U lately. So I think that's a program that was heading in the right direction and will continue to head in the right direction, even in the midst of a coaching change. I think that's really encouraging. So, um, shit, we've been talking this long. I still haven't even gotten to M1 yet. So let me spend some time here on the Griffins. Outside of Clarkston, the Griffins are probably the next best team in the OAA, and it shouldn't have taken me this long to get to them. Stony Creek may want a word with that comment, but Creek and M1 are two totally different teams, in my opinion. M1 is super gritty, scrappy. They can make it an ugly game and really force opponents to play their style of hockey. They just have a way of mucking it up and keeping games close, and I think that favors the Griffins more times than not in most matchups too. You look at Charlie Price, the leader there. He's been there now for a long time. Another guy who feels like is a 6-year senior or something like that. He's hoping, obviously, his last season is his best season yet. And excuse me, I do think the Griffins could miss a guy like Logan Eland, his presence in the lineup quite a bit after he graduated last spring. But it's an opportunity, I think, too, for guys like Zach Steiner, Memphis Stillman, to work alongside Price. And conversely, maybe Price can help elevate their games as well. So Stony, on the other hand, I called them a pretty team in the blog on pdspicks.com. It's not necessarily a bad thing. You want guys who can make fancy plays, guys with good hands, who can finish and make some of those tic-tac-toe plays. But you also need to make the simple and easy plays as well. Chipping pucks out of the D zone, being fast and aggressive on a forecheck, and skating without the puck, blocking shots, doing those little things. I think those keys are just what separates M1 from Stony at this point in my early preseason rankings. And obviously, we'll see how it all unfolds. But But like I said, that's just kind of where I see those two teams and the dynamic and makeup of those two, and also why I think that favors M1, not just in conference, but in non-conference games too. When you're facing other teams from around the state, when you have that ability to play gritty, play scrappy, works in your favor. Stony, if you want to get into to skill games and high scoring shootouts with some teams, that can be dangerous. So yeah, okay, that was a lot. Let's see, what are we on here right now? Let me check. 46 minutes of great hockey talk. How about that? This was good though. A lot of teams, a lot of players. I mentioned I've had some great exchanges on social media too with people about some of these conference previews and a lot of requests for other conferences and leagues I haven't done yet. Yet being the key word there. I will get to the OKCs and I will get to the SVLs. Like I mentioned, they are coming. Um, but that's also why you need to be following me on Twitter and Instagram so you don't miss a thing. You need to be subscribed to the podcast here on YouTube if you're watching, or Apple and Spotify if you're listening. So I'll be talking a bunch more teams to watch and players to know between now and puck drop. So don't miss it. Until next time, skate hard, have fun, and I'll see you at the rink soon.